The final speaker of the day is Katri Saarikivi. Katri is a cognitive neuroscientist at University of Helsinki. Her talk is titled The Neuroscience of Learning, Creativity and Collaboration. And now you know what to do. Give a warm welcome to Katri Saarikivi.
Thank you. Yay, thank you for staying. There are people here. I was somewhat worried that we'd get a loss of most of the people. I'll try to make this worth the wait, the time, and being an obstacle between this situation and the after party. As was said, I work at the University of Helsinki. There's this place called the Cognitive Brain Research Unit, where I've been working on some pretty interesting stuff with my team, at least in my opinion. We're super interested in how people function together. And what are the skills that we need to understand each other, to connect, to feel a sense of presence, to collaborate. We're super interested in how these mechanisms function when we interact online. So I'm happy to share some of these thoughts with you today. But the whole topic is a little bit broader, so we'll be speaking about learning, creativity, imagination, collaboration, and empathy. And the reason why is because I happen to think that these are the most important cognitive skills that a human can possess. I think that they're the reason why we exist today in the first place. They're at the root of human flourishing, the success of our species. And I also happen to think that they're super important when we think about the future. And I hope that by the end of the talk, you might agree with me on these topics. I divided the talk into 3 different sections. So first, I'd like to provide some justifications for why I think that these are so super important cognitive skills. And that's why first we'll have a short discussion on change, the phenomenon of change that is, of course, a constant in this world and will continue to be one. Then we'll dive into the neuroscience of learning, of creativity, our imagination, and of collaboration, meaning we'll take a look at the neural mechanisms that underlie empathy. And lastly, we'll take a look at how the digital world, how these things function online, what kinds of things happen when we try to understand each other over the internet, whether there are some things that might go wrong and what we could do about it. And I'm really interested in what these thoughts, what these research findings spur up in your minds. So I really hope that we'll have a time for discussion and that you'll be brave to bring out your own questions and comments on these things. I'm so happy to see people. I'm so really eager to have some interaction, some exchange of thoughts on these topics. They're very dear to me. But so, let's get going with the topic of change. It might sound a little bit kind of stressful that change is a constant, and that's certainly something that we have experienced during the last few years. We've been adapting to change over and over again. We've had to adapt to change if we have wanted to survive as work organizations, and if we wanted to kind of stay sane as individuals. And then when we think that perhaps things will get to normal, well, no, they do not. Another overhaul, everything is completely different. And again, we need to adapt to change. But as it happens, human beings are experts in adapting to change. Actually, I think that we're the best skilled animal on this planet in adaptation to change. And you might arrive at the same conclusion if you think about human history at a slightly greater length, especially if you think about human prehistory. Because for a very long time, the human environment, our living environment, our working environment was rather constant. It stayed the same. We dwelled in the forest. So the prehistoric home of the human being looked like this. And surviving in the early world meant solving problems related to survival in a pretty kind of constant environment. The problems we had to solve were the same, and we found a way to exist, solve these problems, and kind of flourish as animals in that environment. Then at some point, according to some researchers, a very dramatic change happened. It's been said that for some reason, very abruptly, the early human species had to move away from the forest and into the savanna. And if you think about this change, it's super dramatic. It's a complete change of our living environment. And usually when this type of change happens for an organism on this planet, that the living environment totally changes, no more trees, for example, it means extinction. But for some reason, we're still here. It's a weird thing. What on earth happened? How were we able to adapt to a total overhaul of our living environment? I believe that the answer lies in our ability to learn and in our ability to think creatively. Because what happened when we moved from the forest to the savanna is we had to come up with new ways of solving problems related to survival. And that led to the creation of the very first technologies, the very first tools. We couldn't solve the problems related to survival on our own. We had to come up with something that didn't exist yet. We had to be creative enough to solve problems in a totally new way. We had to realize that the models we had no longer applied. We needed to change these models, which means that we needed to learn and learn very fast. And the combination of this learning ability, the ability to see that the old way doesn't apply, we need to change, and the ability to come up with something that did not exist yet, led to the creation of the very first tools, the very first technology. And that allowed us to survive. That allowed us to improve our species in many ways, even today, and to flourish in a new way, in a totally new environment. But as so very often happens, response to change led to new types of change within our species. Many scientists believe that the invention of the very first tools led to human beings spending more time together. It is believed that when we came up with the first stone, axes, and spears, we started hunting together more than previously. So we started hanging out with each other more. And this had a tremendous impact on our brains. It seems that because of this, we started developing these very nuanced collaborative capabilities. Our empathy skills started blossoming because we started spending more time together. And through that, empathy became a sort of survival skill. It was more probable for you to survive if you could work together with others, if you could kind of bear the cognitive load of work together with others. This thing on the slide is it's a cave painting from, I think, 20,000 years ago, and to me, it looks like a prehistoric social media. We're up to the same stuff even today, trying to find a connection to other people, trying to be meaningful to other people. There are many things to say about social media, many of them negative. We'll have that discussion toward the end of the talk. But to me, it also reveals something very kind of endearing and cute about human beings. The recognition and feedback of other human beings is really important to us. We experience such joy when even a stranger likes our posts on social media or gives us a little bit of attention. We're really dependent on each other. In a good way, but also perhaps in bad ways. But in sum, if you think about the long human history that has taken us to this moment, to this place, learning, imagination, creativity, our abilities to collaborate are at the root of why we're still here. And I don't know about you, but I think that these are still the key skills we need in order to flourish in work, life, in our personal lives. They're kind of the key ingredients of being human, the things that perhaps separate us from other animals on this planet. And I also hope that if you think about our long-spanning history on this planet, you might feel a little bit of hope, maybe some security, some safety in knowing that these capacities are within all of our brains. We already have the skills we need to survive and flourish in this world. But what I think needs to happen today is that we remove the obstacles of these very natural cognitive processes and skills. There are many things that can hinder learning, creative thinking, collaboration, empathy. It's more about kind of making room for the humanness in this very technological world. That was part one of my talk. It's kind of like a sales pitch part where I try to get you interested in the topics that we'll next dive into. I'm trying to see the audience. The lights are so bright. Am I doing a good job or not? Are you interested? Yay! Okay. So these are cognitive processes that are super interesting to me. The next part is trying to make them super interesting to you as well. But unfortunately, this part of the talk will start off with sort of like a boring type of reminder about what is needed, what is like the basic things that need to be in place for us to be able to be creative, to learn effectively, and to be empathic. And that means that we absolutely must speak about well-being. Now, even the word well-being is somehow, cringe-worthy. It's starting to feel like something you hear over and over again. Yeah, we need to fare well. We need to have this well-being. It's super important in work, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at the neuroscience of the well-being of our brains, it is actually a prerequisite for higher order thought. We need it to be able to understand other people, to create new mental models, revise old ones, come up with things that don't exist. That's why I'd like to start this part of the talk by diving into the neuroscience of stress. I'm so sorry, but we have to do this, and I promise it'll make sense, because well-being today is so much about managing stress. Sometimes I feel rather frustrated when there are so many ways of managing stress. If you open the internet, you turn a page in a magazine, there are so many articles about mindfulness and meditation and yoga and green smoothies and all kinds of things you can do to manage stress. But it's not working. People are more burned out than ever. The stress curves are just rising every day. And I'm kind of perplexed about what do we need to do? That's why I'm including stress in this talk as well, because I'm about to show you what it actually does to your brain. The tricky part of stress is that when we are overstressed, it hinders our self-reflective capabilities, our self-awareness. And this explains why sometimes when you speak with a person who's been through burnout, they'll tell you that, for years I was in a state that was super bad, but I didn't really even realize it myself. Like now when I think back to that time when I was super stressed, I'm amazed. How could I even function? So when you are too stressed, the parts of your brain that are responsible for self-awareness decline. It's really nasty because you might not kind of understand that, okay, my brain is not up to the task. I should maybe take a break. I'm becoming overstressed. So how do you know if you're too stressed? Well, do not fear. I have the solution. I call it the stress bingo. So I've come up with these symptoms of thought that are clear signs that stress is interfering with your brain function in a way that is really detrimental and kind of precludes learning, creativity, and empathy. So I'll go through these symptoms. We'll see if anyone gets a bingo here. If you do, I promise a special prize. It's a nap. Instead of the after party. So take a look at these symptoms and you can think whether you might be experiencing them today, hopefully not, but maybe think about a moment in your life, a time in your life when you've had a lot of these symptoms, and think about what was behind these symptoms, what was causing them. So number one, this is a very typical disorder of thought that happens because of too much stress. It's impulsivity. It's like someone else is behind the wheel. You might say something you want to take back immediately. Your emotions surface. You start crying at commercials, whatever. These kind of like the kids in your brain are running wild, you have no control over them. These automatic responses surface and you have no control. Does it sound familiar? This also happens if you're super tired, like if you haven't slept at all. You lose impulse control, you lose your inhibitions. Sometimes it's nice to lose your inhibitions, to lose them, but if it happens because of too much stress, it's usually not that helpful. Then increased distractibility. This also happens very often if you're too stressed. And it is the state where, when typically your brain helps you focus on things by decreasing processing of information that you're not attending to. So your attention is like a spotlight. Your brain focuses all the mental energy on the thing you're looking at or focusing on, and the other things are not processed in that much detail. When you're too stressed, the filter doesn't work, and your brain starts processing, for example, sounds in the environment, people moving in the environment too much. And then you might get the feeling like, why are you breathing so loudly when I'm trying to speak here, man? I'm trying to focus. Why are you eating that banana so loudly? Things like this happen. Does it sound familiar? Maybe. Well, how about getting stuck? You ever get stuck in a loop? For example, read the same paragraph over and over again, but just can't proceed. Or try to solve a problem with this in the same way over and over again, even though you just noticed it doesn't work. I'm laughing because I've just done a lot of scripting on MATLAB. That happens to me a lot. You might also get stuck in these mental loops in your own mind, and this is very typical when you're super stressed. Do you know the scumbag brain meme? Look it up. Your brain is a scumbag, especially when you're stressed. It comes up with these fantastic loops of thought within which you get stuck. And usually these thought loops contain things like, you suck, you'll never succeed, you're already late, things won't work. And then you loop over and over again in a stress state of mind. Really doesn't help with the stress. So that happens. Next symptom, the mental block. I wrote the post-it session nightmare because sometimes it takes place when you have this post-it session where you're supposed to come up with new ideas, 5 minutes, and then nothing is coming out of your brain. You are not able to produce any information from the brain. Or the blank paper, the fear of the blank paper, these types of things. Next one, swooshing, whatever you want to call it. And I think that even without stress, we're getting really good at this nowadays. We're super good at flexibly changing the point of attention or our focus of attention, so that we do one thing for 30 seconds, then change to the next one, then the next one, then the next one. And there is a technological reason for this. I think we've trained our brains to kind of attend for very short periods of time. Perhaps because the devices we use, they contain these things that automatically grab our attention, like loud sounds and the red color. They speak to the primal part of our brains, like, wow, what is that? I must react immediately. But at the cost of concentration and focus. Alongside stress, this loss of concentration is another thing I keep hearing all the time. Like, people can't even read a book. It's getting pretty bad. You should do something about it. Next one, is your brain slippery? If you think about it anatomically, yes, it is. Your brain is also really mushy. But as a state of mind, as a symptom of thought, this means that sometimes it feels like someone has poured like olive oil on your brain and things they just slip off. They just don't stick. What were you saying? Can you repeat it? Just didn't stick yet. It has also a kind of opposite symptom, the overload, where everything seems to stick, but you can't form any sense of the things that are in your mind. Your brain just seems to be full of information. So that's the kind of stress bingo. Do we have a bingo? Yes. Oh dear. Oh dear. Come see me backstage afterwards. We'll try to do something about it. So we have a bingo, and that means that your brain currently is in a reflexive state. So when we get a lot of these symptoms of thought, it means, or we usually say that the brain has shifted from reflective thinking to reflexive thinking. And this is because too much stress interferes with the functioning of our frontal lobes, a fantastic part of the brain. We really need the frontal lobes and their connections to other parts of the brain for exactly the cognitive skills that we're focusing on today: learning, collaboration, creativity. And you can think about it so that the frontal lobes and their connections to other parts of the brain, they're kind of like your inner boss. There are these mechanisms called executive functions. So you have this inner boss that takes care of your attention going where it should go, that you function flexibly, that if the situation changes, you change your functioning strategy, these types of things. They take care of you spending your mental resources on what is important. A little bit of stress helps the frontal lobes and the executive functions. You might have experienced this. You're at your best when there's a little bit of pressure. But when it goes overboard, it interferes with this part of the brain, and the inner boss goes by, and then the kids come out to play. Your emotions run wild, you get stuck in these automated responses, and so on. So if we are overstressed, our brains are not in a state that is fruitful for high-quality learning, complex problem solving, understanding other people. And it's really easy to understand. Like, say you're overstressed, you just don't have the energy for other people. It's too much information, it's a nuisance. You're probably not that creative. Sometimes being a little bit tired is beneficial for creativity, but we'll speak about that a little later on. Also, sometimes, a couple drinks is good for creativity. I'll also explain that later on. It pertains to the frontal lobes. But mainly when we get this loss of inhibition and things like that because of stress, it is a negative state. There, that was my sermon on stress. The crazy thing is that you probably already knew all of this. This is information that is out there. We all know that we need to do something about stress. It's not good for the brain. It can actually, destroy tissue in the frontal lobes if it goes on for too long. So why aren't we doing anything? Why aren't things changing? It's a really interesting question. Maybe we need to focus more on what is the opposite of stress. Thank goodness we do have the ability to relax. Our bodies are really good at creating the stress reaction. It's supposed to help us. It's supposed to help us functioning in these kind of really demanding situations. But our bodies also have like the opposite reaction. They can create the relaxation reaction. And when you look at the scientific explanation of stress, stress occurs when an individual is confronted with a stressor. It's very simple. And also kind of opens up the individual aspect of stress. So what is a stressor for you might be different than what it is for me. And the stressor can be outside. It can be, for example, a demanding audience. Or it can be inside your mind. It can be like the thought of a demanding audience. So what to do? If you want the relaxation reaction to occur, we need to get rid of the stressors from the mind and also from the environment. And I think herein lies the problem. So when is the last time you've been in a totally stress-free or a stressor-free environment? When is the last time your mind has been free of stressors, thoughts that bug you, things that kind of elevate your heart rate immediately? Do we even remember what being stress-free looks like? Let's learn this from the animals. Looks a little bit like this. Even these species we consider somewhat less developed than our own understand the importance of, laying back, becoming relaxed. When's the last time you looked like this? Like red in the face, a little bit like a monkey. Maybe later on this evening. I'm sorry. Yeah. And we'll speak about this a little later on when we kind of dive into the digital world, but we are living in an interesting time. I think many of us spend the entire day focusing on something. Even if in our leisure time we're focusing on something, we're in a state of high arousal. And there's very little space for actually being super lazy, like letting your mind wander, your eyes drift apart and drool a little bit. It seems like not very useful, but when you look at the neuroscience of creativity, for example, it's actually something we need a lot. Yeah, but I'll let that kind of stick in the back of your minds. But as I said, this is the prerequisite of a higher order cognitive functioning. If we are overstressed, learning won't work. If we're overstressed, empathy won't work. Creativity might, in a weird sense, but still, this is something we need to take care of before we start demanding these things of ourselves. So let's assume that we're all now stress-free and our brains are in an optimal state, everything's taken care of and no one has the bingo. Now we can look at what learning requires. What is it that happens in the brain when we learn? Now, I don't know about you, but learning has this kind of like stress management and well-being. Learning sounds slightly boring. But it's a widely fascinating phenomenon when you look at it from a kind of a large perspective. Because life, in all its forms, is so much about learning. In addition to human beings, all of the species on this planet have to learn, some more than others. For example, regard the baby octopus. It doesn't need to learn a lot. It's ready from birth. It might look cute, but it's actually super deadly. It's a really bloodthirsty predator. Straight from birth, it's independent. It can hunt on its own. If it needs to learn something, it does that also independently. It doesn't need any help. The octopi are super learners, but they are kind of ready from birth. Other animals need a lot of help in learning. Some species, they stay with their moms and dads or parents for lengthy periods of time where they're taught how to survive in the world, learn new skills, attain motor skills, foraging skills, these kinds of things. But the ultimate first prize in how long it takes to learn stuff goes to human beings. We have a really, really prolonged childhood, adolescence. Our brains develop even during early adulthood. We keep getting these results of our brains keeping to develop really long, like up to our 25th year or something like this. So a big part of our lives is reserved only for learning the most important skills we need to survive. And to me, it sounds like we need a lot of time to learn how to human. It's a very complex thing, being a human in this world. We need a couple of decades to learn all the skills we need to know. And our brains do develop during this time. They are not mature until kind of mid-adulthood. It also means that our brains are really powerful learning machines. It's like their prime task from birth, learn very quickly. Learn about important things and learn very quickly. And actually, our brains are learning all the time without us even noticing. For example, your auditory system has formed a model of this space without you even noticing. It's made a model about the sounds that are regular in this space. And then if a model violation occurs, something would change, we'd get a loud beep or something, you'd notice that, and your brain would alter the model. So constantly we create models about the world so that we can predict what will happen. Our brain is very stereotyped. We need stereotypes, we need models, previous knowledge or expectations about what will happen to function in this world. Because if we didn't have models, if we didn't have kind of prejudice, we couldn't function. There's so much information to deal with in every single moment that we couldn't function. So we need these models. But learning is noticing that the previous model doesn't apply and changing that model. So for example, in my mind, there's a model about how you behave when you're performing. I try to stick to that model. But then if something happened, like I'd notice everyone walking out, I'd need to change that model, right? If I didn't change that model, it would make me stupid and less able to adapt to my environment. So learning is the brain changing on this kind of conceptual level about our models changing, our thought patterns changing, and also the structure and function of the brain changing. There are a lot of studies that have been done with like expert musicians and cab drivers that show that if you learn something very much, your brain will respond to that, will get more stuff in areas that are important for that thing you're doing. So your brain is what you do. It's like your brain is all the time looking, okay, they started playing the piano, let's put more stuff on the motor cortex so it goes well. Let's form these new connections so that they're able to do what they want to do. The only problem is that even though our brains are super powerful learning machines, they're also programmed to be as lazy as possible. So even though we have this prime objective of learning, another one is conserve energy at all costs. And that is explained by our lengthy history on this planet. It's a really new thing that we have these, popcorn everywhere, and or fudge-covered popcorn. Give that to someone in the Stone Age, and they'd go bananas. So the rule for the brain is to don't change unless it's super necessary. So how do our brains know when it's necessary? Well, if things are valuable enough, then it's necessary. If things are kind of important enough, then it's necessary. Well, what is the signal of importance and value in the brain? It's emotion. And emotions are sometimes like, well, there is this boom in work life at the moment. It's like emotions are needed at the workplace. But what does that actually mean? Emotions are on all the time. They help your brain focus on what is important, because emotions are signals of value, of salience in the brain, like, hey, this is important. And that also explains why we're so different, because different things can be important to you than me. So your brain will kind of give a salience stamp to other things in your environment than mine. But the emotions direct our mental energy to what is important. And in terms of learning, one of the most important emotions is curiosity. This probably makes sense. But there are brain imaging studies that show that if a person is in a curious mind state, for some reason, the brain areas related to learning are more active than otherwise. And of course, learning happens more effectively. You remember more stuff about the things you're curious of. The brain areas such as like memory, attention, and also error processing of novelty, of deviance, these types of things. But what does curiosity require in order to surface? Well, it requires us noticing that something is off. So all learning starts with noticing that, hey, my previous model does not apply. There's something off, something unexpected. And then what happens is actually what defines whether curiosity can arise. Because sometimes the new thing, the novelty, is scary. It promotes anxiety. We don't like the thing being new. And if that happens, there's no curiosity, there's no learning. So when we encounter novelty, when we notice that our model doesn't apply, we need to somehow get rid of the fear if we want to learn. And this explains why sometimes people hold really, really peculiar notions, for example, about how the world works. I don't know if you've seen, there's this documentary, I think it's still on Netflix, it's about the flat earthers. And it's a really respectful documentary. I like it because of that. But they try to understand what's going on. How can you hold these really strange beliefs that the world is flat when it obviously is round? And there's this part in the documentary where a couple of guys, I think they are engineers, they go out and they do an experiment with a really expensive device, and they want to prove with a scientific experiment that the world is actually flat. And then But they do the experiment as it should be done. The device is okay. And then they get the result that it proves that the world is actually round. And they can't accept it. They arrive at the conclusion, well, there's something wrong with the device. We need a bigger, more expensive device, and then we'll run this experiment again. So even when we encounter facts, if the model we now hold is too dear to us, and the new fact that we would need to correct the model provokes anxiety for any reason, learning is not possible, it just won't happen. And sometimes, for example, belonging to a group is more important to human beings than understanding the truth. It might not be adaptive to understand the truth if it means that, I won't be invited to RoboCon anymore again, ever again. Another emotion that's super important and beneficial for learning is the experience of awe. It's a mind state. Perfect example on YouTube. Have you seen, it's already old, the double rainbow video? How many of you have seen? Yeah. Go check it out. This person is in a state of awe. He's experiencing awe. It's like the textbook example. Well, what happens when we experience awe is that there's a part of the brain responsible for upholding our mental models. And when we are in awe, this part of the brain kind of decreases in activity. That's why there's a photo of a beanie there, because we have this saying in Finnish, pipo vähän löysemmälle. Like, loosen your beanie, don't be such a tight ass or something like this. So you're more open to new explanations, novel information. You're able to kind of completely renew your mental models if needed. That's why there's also evidence that if you are in a state of awe, you might actually also accept these esoteric religious explanations of the world more easily. So it's not only a good thing. And there's also this thing called threat awe. So threatening things can also provoke awe, but they all lead to really quick learning, the ability to really shift mental models quickly. In experiments, awe is usually generated by, for example, showing videos and images of beautiful, big, natural phenomena, architectural choices, design choices can provoke the experience of awe. And there are studies showing that even people can promote the experience of awe. To me, Elvis is awesome. When I was small, I was so in love with him, like at age 5 or something, and I was so devastated when they told me he's dead. And did you know that Elvis in his time was so awesome that they had this rule that you couldn't film him like below the waist on TV? It was too much for people to handle. So that is like a textbook experience of awe. But if you think about, so what do these things have in common, like natural phenomena, beautiful architecture, so on? There are two things that need to be in place for awe to emerge, and that's vastness, experienced vastness. It can be so that you are vast and the thing you're looking at is small, but more often it is like, I'm confronted with something much bigger than myself. And that perhaps promotes the need for accommodation. So you get this feeling of kind of intellectual humility, like, I don't know everything. I am small in front of this big thing. I need to change. I need to kind of understand this, improve my understanding of this. So that's perhaps why you can kind of totally change your outlook on life, totally change your mental models if you're in the experience of awe. So the trick is to think about, if you want to learn in a more effective way, what are the things you're curious about? Or are there things that really promote this sense of awe? Or could we incorporate these in learning situations? Actually, if you think about clickbait, they're designed to kind of bring out the experience of curiosity. They start with these questions like, did you know you've always cooked your eggs wrong? Are you wearing your socks wrong? And they're like, what? Is my model wrong? I need to find out. So there are also kind of nasty ways to use these to provoke human curiosity or interest. But if you want to learn more effectively, think about emotions. Think about, because they guide your mental energy. and they directly influence how you can kind of revamp your mental models. Moving on to creativity. Now, I already promised that there is a strange connection between creativity, being tired, and alcohol. And that is explained by the default mode. Kind of like bridging towards the after party here. That is explained by the default mode network. Sounds boring, but this was discovered in neuroimaging studies where the subjects were asked to lie in the scanner and think about absolutely nothing. So they wanted kind of like a pure, non-existent brain state, nothing happening, nothing specific happening in the brain. And the researchers were very frustrated because when they were looking at the data, they're like, what the heck? There's this one network activating all the time. We told them not to think about anything. And then when these people were asked, so what were you doing? We told you not to do anything. They were thinking, their minds started wandering. And I think it's kind of a nice way to describe human imagination, that when this network is active, when your mind is wandering, people usually think about the past, the future, and other people. That's like the main content of our thoughts, what's going on in there. And also, if this network is active, we get more ideas. We get more new things popping up in our minds than when we're in a state of focusing on something, trying to solve a problem actively. This is why there are studies showing that mind wandering is actually really beneficial if you're trying to solve a problem. Sleeping over the night is really important if you're trying to make a good decision. So allowing your mind to be in an unfocused state is also important if we want to learn effectively, come up with new things. This means that sometimes the inner boss, the executive functions, need to let go. And this explains why sometimes when you're tired, you come up with more ideas. Sometimes if you had a few, you come up with more ideas. Because also fatigue and alcohol impact the frontal lobes, the prefrontal cortex. So sometimes we need disinhibition to allow the default mode network to become active, for us to come up with new ideas and so on. If you want to know, alcohol influences the brain in this order. So first, the frontal lobes. So you might notice a loss of inhibition. Then moving to the motor cortex, in the middle of the brain, you might kind of lose your fine motor skills. And the very last brain part to be affected is the cerebellum, the little brain here, which is responsible for corrective movement. So if you're in this state, the cerebellum is out, and you should definitely stop drinking. Yeah. So these types of studies also explain why sometimes boredom has been found to increase our creative problem-solving capabilities. I don't know if you've experienced this, but at least to me, it requires boredom of some sort or unfocusing of some sort to come up with new things. Also, movement might help, going outdoors might help, kind of allowing yourself to go into that state where you're not focusing, where your mind can kind of find new paths. Seems to be super important for creativity. And if you're still wondering what that feeling is like when you might be in that state, you can think about in what state would you best answer the following questions. What is the mind state that would be best for you to perform well in a couple of tests I'm going to show you? So I'll show you a couple of tests that are routinely used to study creativity. It'll also reveal how kind of narrow a view there often is on creativity in brain studies, but we need to kind of focus and control for so many factors that usually this is the result. This is a creativity test, and it goes so that you come up with as many uses for this tin can as possible. You have 1 minute. You don't actually need to. But in what mind state would you perform best in this type of task? You can think about that. It's called like many uses or divergent thinking type of stuff. And also goes to show that sometimes it's nice to share these types of endeavors with others. You can probably come up with more uses with another person. Here's another creativity test, and this we can actually do. So what word could make a compound word with each of the things on the slide? You can shout it out if you come up with it. So what word could you combine, either put it in front of or behind the word on the slide to form a compound word? So the same word would make a compound word with each of the three ones on the slide. What's the correct answer? Cypress Hill is one hint I'm gonna give you for the last word. Brain! Brain scan, brain freeze, and membrane. You're not tired enough. Yeah. So that's what creativity might feel like, kind of this insight or coming up with unusual things, divergent things. And it's sometimes good to think about how we spend our days, in what type of cognitive state do we spend most of the day? Are we in this focused state where we're producing things, where we're kind of performing at a high level? Do we have enough time for the mind to wander? Do we have enough time for the mind to kind of find new paths, create new models? Last skill, empathy. Are you still with me? Yay! Empathy sounds kind of soft. It sounds like it's an emotion or a personality characteristic. But from the perspective of cognitive neuroscience, it's three things. And it is three things because these domains of empathy are supported by separate brain mechanisms. So one part of empathy is understanding other people, is putting yourself in the mind of another person, seeing things from their perspective. And an important brain function or mechanism for understanding others is the mentalizing network, which is very much the same as the default mode network. So in a really curious way, creativity, imagination, and empathy overlap. And when you think about it, it is your imagination that helps you understand other people. Your imagination allows you to simulate other people's minds within your own mind and predict where that mind will go, what it will arrive at, what it'll feel. So we're continuously kind of creating other people's minds within our own minds. We're also creating our own mind within our own mind when we're self-aware, when we self-reflect. So it's really strange things happening all the time in your brain. Another part of empathy is the ability to share experiences. So we use our own subjective experiences, our own emotions, for example, to understand those of the other person. So I think that's somehow very beautiful and perhaps something that's difficult for machines to attain, because they would need their own emotional experiences to truly kind of resonate with those of human beings. This is in part supported by the mirror neuron network. So we have these mirror neurons that don't really understand that you and I are different people. And I think that's also a really beautiful thought. Experience sharing is also a lot about synchronizing with other people, becoming similar, finding the same rhythm. You might have noticed that when you walk with someone, you're on the street, you really quickly start walking in the same rhythm. When you're having a conversation, your speech rhythms align. If applause goes on for long enough, usually people start clapping in the same rhythm. I think that the cutest study on this inter-individual synchronization was done like decades ago. But they put the subjects to sit on a high ledge so that their feet didn't touch the ground. And when you put a person on a high ledge so that their feet don't touch the ground, they usually automatically start kind of wiggling or waving their feet like this. It happens to all of us, even adults. And they found that the participants couldn't see each other's feet, but they very, very quickly started waving the feet in the same rhythm. So they want to be in the same rhythm. We want to be in the same rhythm with other people. And the sort of boring, very kind of clear-cut explanation for this synchronization is that if you and I are walking, and you're walking in the same rhythm as I am, it takes less energy from my brain to predict your next move than if you were in a different rhythm. So it's for kind of like economy. It saves energy. We're more efficient if we're in the same rhythm. It also shows that feeling similar to others is an important part of feeling this cohesion, like acting efficiently with others. There are a lot of studies on the benefits of empathy in human populations, in collaboration. For example, empathy skills have found to predict collective intelligence, or to predict kind of more simply, empathy skills correlate with teams' ability to solve problems. You need other skills as well, of course. And for example, in our studies, in some tasks, empathy skills have not been that important. But in general, if you need to work with other people, it's really good to know what's going on in their brains and be able to predict. Another interesting thing about empathy is, in addition to it overlapping with creativity, it also overlaps with trust. So they found that if we activate these empathy mechanisms in interaction, it can increase trust on a measurable level. So just like having people move more in synchrony has increased trust. Now, of course, we form an opinion of whether someone is trustworthy or not based on a lot of information, but promoting empathy might be one way to increase it. And if you think about it, it's really natural. Like, if I feel that you are like me, then my emotions are your emotions if we're in sync. And then I know that if you hurt me, it'll also hurt you. So the more similar I am, the more I can trust that you'll do nothing that'll hurt me, because you'll also be affected in a negative way. Or then there's this narcissistic explanation that, you're really much like me. Well, that's a really trustworthy person. That's like a hero, superhuman being. In our studies, we've been really interested in this interbrain synchronization. So as I just explained, our bodies synchronize in many ways when we interact. We find the same speech rhythm. We move in the same rhythm. This can also occur on the level of the electrical activity of the brain. So we have these neural oscillations that control how the different parts of the brain communicate. And when we interact, sometimes these oscillations find the same rhythm. They can phase lock, which is, to me, astounding, or they can kind of increase in amplitude at the same time. Now, we've been studying this interbrain synchronization because it's cool, and you can measure it with EEG pretty easily. And we found that it does predict the success of collaboration, like many other studies. And now I have to show you how we studied this, because I think it's a lot of fun, and I want to show you that science can be fun. So you already see in this image a picture of our experiment. So we created this car game where a pair was tasked with navigating the car as quickly as possible along the track, and they also had to stay on the track. And the trick was that they were sitting in two separate rooms. They couldn't speak to each other, they couldn't hear each other, and the other person was controlling the accelerator and the brake, and the other person was turning the wheel. This is based there is this episode of Top Gear where they've actually built this type of car. It's a two-tier car. I think have you seen it? Yeah, it's fantastic. So the same idea here. One person is responsible for steering, another person for the brakes and the accelerator. And then we measured the lap times. We split the track into segments, and we measured whether interbrain synchronization predicts lap times momentarily. It did. Even though the people were in two separate rooms, which goes to show how important your imagination is for empathy, and how little it might require. They just had to imagine the other person over there steering the wheel or accelerating or braking for this synchronization to happen. Now I'm going to show you two excerpts of people doing the game, which might give you a feel of what synchronization might look like or feel like as a person. So this is a pair that's not doing so well. It's a really irritating game because it gets stuck if they hit the sand. It's not doing so well. They're staying on the track, but very often they drive out. Must be super frustrating. They must be blaming each other. Not really finding an understanding here. Next one I'm going to show you is a super pair. They were in total harmony, total synchrony. It was beautiful. Have a look at this. I imagine it felt fantastic. And sometimes we get that type of feeling. It's from the lab. I was on my phone filming this. Sometimes you get that feeling with another person that you're in total sync. You are one. It's a beautiful feeling. It's an interesting feeling. And we think that this interbrain synchronization, or the synchronization of our bodies on many levels, is behind that feeling. So, lastly, I know I'm going to be booted off stage very soon. Very quickly, let's see how the digital world impacts all of this. Let's start with the boring thing, meaning stress. Does technology contribute to stress? How many people think that technology does contribute to stress? Everybody, yeah. One of the reasons is attention. We have all these attention grabbers in our environment. One of the reasons for the epidemic of inattention is that it's being spread all around the place. And it can't be all around the place at the same time. And usually people find it pretty stressful when they have to switch all the time. Another reason is here. It's terrible clickbait. Of course I had to click. It says cell phones make you dumb. It was an actually really well done study where they found that the closer a phone was to a participant, the worse they did in tasks for executive functions. So tasks requiring the frontal lobes. So there's something weird happening in the proximity of our phones that disturbs exactly the brain areas that we need for higher quality thought. What do you think? Does technology inhibit empathy? Questionable, yeah. Well, if you think about things that usually inhibit empathy, I think that they are aggravated or at least present in many of the places, or the online places where we interact. There are many kind of dehumanizing aspects, for example, to social media, because it's only text-based, that kind of lead to a decline in these mechanisms. So even though we have these mechanisms, we've always had them as human beings, as a species, sometimes there are obstacles. And these mechanisms don't get the feedback they need in order to activate. One very important feedback is that we need to realize, oh, there's a human being. That's why you might want to do the opposite of dehumanizing if you want to increase empathy. I must tell this because it's super funny. I recall there being an article on autonomous vehicles, where they found that people had a really hard time predicting the movements of autonomous vehicles. And then they put eyes on the vehicle. And people did much better. They humanized the inanimate thing, and our brains were better able to predict the movements. Video, sadly, does not help. They found that using video actually decreases the problem-solving capability of pairs. Why? Well, at least interbrain synchronization, body language, it's a matter of milliseconds. It's a phenomenon that it needs to be really accurate for it to be helpful. And if you don't get this information in real time, it actually might just be a nuisance. Might be kind of superfluous information in the moment. Lag may be, it sounds so simple, but it actually might interfere with a lot of the important empathy mechanisms we have in our brains, which also explains why people really often speak on top of each other in a Teams meeting or in the Zoom. You do see the body language, but the slight lag makes it so that it doesn't help you at all. So what to do? What increases empathy? Well, you can think about the tripartite model and just think about the mechanisms. So if I want to be more empathic, what can I do to kind of stimulate my imagination? For example, reading fiction has been found to improve individuals' empathy skills. If experience sharing is part of empathy, what can we do to increase synchronization, emotion contagion? If we're online and we don't see each other, is there a way to increase this emotion information in that situation? What can we do to promote goodwill? And I think even these are things that we already do know. Because think about the typical human party depicted here. This is what you'll experience later on tonight. That's what I've heard. We include these synchronizing things when we have these parties where we try to increase cohesion. We move in the same rhythm. We share experiences. We share emotions. We eat and drink together. Most powerful way to increase empathy in a group is a party. I'm really glad you'll have one later on this evening. Then how about online? And I've been racking my brain about this. So how could we increase empathy online? How could we kind of tickle these empathy mechanisms that are in our brains, even in a situation of lag? What's the most powerful way you can connect with someone and experience cohesion online? And I think the answer is games. Yeah. I think the answer is games. We have all the, the metaverse is coming and you can go into VR and experiencing space is really important, but having shared intention, that's so much more powerful. Finding the same rhythm, sharing goals, I think that's the most powerful thing you can right now do online. So I think that all work organizations should start playing games together if they work remotely. I need to end here. I'm so sorry about going over time. I do have time for questions if you guys do. Thank you.
Thank you, Katri, for amazing talk.
Yeah.
And thank you for reminding me about the double rainbow video.
Yeah. But think about the person. Is like the thing he says is he keeps repeating. What does it mean? That's like the purest state of learning you can have.
I know what I'm going to do tonight.
Yeah.
I'll watch it multiple times. Few questions from the audience. We had a bunch of questions. Some of them got answered in these last slides, but I have few for you. Can one have too little stress?
Yes, you can. It depends on what you're trying to do, but a little bit of stress promotes the functioning of the frontal lobes, and we've experienced this. I need a little bit of pressure to perform well on stage. We were just talking about that backstage. Yeah.
If you lose brain cells due to stress, can you gain those back? I'm asking for a friend.
You can. Yeah, there are these terrible studies showing that chronic occupational stress leads to tissue loss in the frontal lobes. But recently we started seeing studies that show that it's at least in part comes back, because neurogenesis does occur also in adult humans. To a smaller degree than in babies or children, but it does, yeah. It's not all lost, don't fear.
And I really liked you mentioning boredom, because at least for me, I don't feel boredom unless I kind of like make it happen.
Yeah.
And from that, is meditation kind of being bored? And is meditation, because it's boring as hell.
Yeah,
but
it is boring as hell, I agree.
but I think it's beneficial.
Yeah. Well, there are many reasons why we can't be bored anymore. And one pertains to this dopamine hypothesis, because we get a lot of really quick rewards from social media and so on. It's like eating candy all the time. If you eat candy all the time, bananas taste like nothing. If you're in a karkkilakko, if you have don't eat candy at all, bananas are the candy. So the same thing we're not accustomed to being bored today because we have so much stimulation.
How about yourself? Do you use social media?
I do. And I've had some trouble with this. Have you noticed? And nowadays, sounds like I'm really old. When I was young and you were watching YouTube, if you put it away, it went away. Now when you try to put YouTube away, it stays on in like a little screen, so you can kind of multitask more. It shows that people need more and more stimulation, where our tolerance is growing for this kind of quick rewards. We need more all the time, and soon everything will feel like nothing.
Luckily, we have some limits. I have the limits on, like app limits, but it's really easy to just say, like, yeah, skip it for today, and I'll use it more. And I do it daily.
We are totally irresponsible adults. We are, but if we can't really kind of face ourselves and say, I'm super addicted. For example, once I noticed, I live on the 3rd floor, and there was a time in my life when I would walk up the stairs and I would get so bored walking up the stairs that I needed to look at my phone. That was like a wake-up call. Now I'm trying to get used to boredom. So for example, when I'm cooking, I do not simultaneously listen to an audiobook. I do not. Cooking should be enough stimulation. I have to tell you, the first 2 times were awful. Like, I can't just cut this onion. I can't. It's so boring. We're like children.
One more question. There's a question about continuous daily context switching. Is it bad for you? But I think compared to social media, the context switching that we do, like if I work on 4 projects during a day, I'll switch maybe, let's say, 10 times. It's nothing compared to the social media thing that I'm doing. But how do you see that, like daily work-related context switching?
Yeah, there's this thing called switch cost. So whenever you switch from a task to another, it has a cost. You need to reorient. It takes time. It takes mental resources. And if you switch often, there's more cost. It's really simple. So you would spend less time on the task itself. You would complete it and only then go on to the next one. But this being said, I switch all the time myself. But just recently, we took a trip with a colleague of mine, and we were able to focus for 2 months on just one thing, data analysis. And it was a really life-changing experience. And I made the solemn vow that from now on, I will have only 1 or 2 things I focus on, and 1 day reserved in the week for what we call, paskasella. So we made the solemn vow, hasn't worked.
Hey,
it's really tough.
I think with that, it's good to end. Thank you, Katri. Would you like to talk?
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much.